Hey guys, Shane here. So welcome to the next episode of my Tamiya duce and a half truck build. And in this episode, we're going to be taking a look at the painting and first layer of weathering for this build. So I first primed our model with Mr. Surfster 500, and now I'm going to start adding a pre-shade layer. And for this, I'm going to take some Tamiya NATO Black. I'm going to heavily thin this down with lacquer thinner. I'm roughly going for a ratio of 60% thinner to 40% paint. And I'm spraying with a 0.2mm needle on my Hardern Steenbeck Evolution. And I'm roughly going at about 15 psi on my airbrush compressor. And this serves as creating an indicator of shadow, and as well as just helping us map out how we're going to apply subsequent highlights going forward. I'm also going to give the tyres a good coat of NATO Black as well, just as a base coat for the rubber tyres. So with the pre-shade allowed to dry, now I'm going to start adding the base coat of our olive drab. And for this, we're going to use some Vallejo Model Color US Air Force olive drab and a little bit of yellow ochre. Now, I kind of mix this in a ratio roughly of 60% olive drab to 40% ochre. Again, you can give and take depending on how faded you want the olive drab coat to be. And I'm going to just add a drop or two of flow improver just to help things spray along quite nicely. And I'm going to slowly start building up our olive drab layer here. I want to try as much as possible to keep some of the NATO Black pre-shade visible in some of the deepest recesses, just to help sell that effect a little bit better. I'm also just going to mask off the radiator that I painted in with NATO Black, just to protect that. And with our base coat somewhat dry, now we're going to start adding our highlights. And for this, we're going to start gradually increasing the amount of olive drab to our mixture. So I'm going to start focusing this colour into the centre of panels and any prominent or raised details that I want to give an indication of highlight or I want to draw attention to. And the trick here is just to slowly and gradually increase the amount of yellow ochre into our olive drab mixture in between coats. So I'll let one coat somewhat dry and then I'll come back in with a slightly lighter coat. And I'm going to keep focusing the lighter coat in more disciplined areas just to draw attention to certain features. So I'm going to keep pushing the highlight, so I'm adding more and more amounts of yellow ochre to the mix. But as I become lighter and lighter, I want to be more and more careful where and how much of this paint I apply. I don't want to completely undo the transition of highlights between details, or I'm becoming more and more disciplined and more focused on areas that I apply this lighter colour into. So you can see me here, I'm kind of picking out some of the raised details here. I'm going into the centre of some of these panels just with this lighter colour even more, just to help punch these out a little bit. Now, so we're going to start basing some of the German items that we have for the cargo, which are various captured jerry cans and fuel drums. And for this, we're going to use XF88 Dark Yellow 2 that I've tinned down again with a little bit of lacquer thinner. And I'm going back now to a nice 15 psi, and I'm just going to build this up over a couple of coats. And then for the US issued jerry cans and fuel drums, we're going to use a couple of colours to make different variations of olive drab. And for this, we're going to use XF62, XF51, and then dark yellow XF60. And I'm just going to mix different mixtures and different compositions of all three just to create different tones. But I will just give everything a quick coat of FX60 and olive drab just to create a slightly faded olive drab as my base colour, and then I'm going to come back in and start picking out individual jerry cans in different mixtures just to create visual interest. So now I'm going to start masking off individual jerry cans, just using a little bit of Tamiya masking tape here. And I'm just going to, like I mentioned, just start using slightly different tones and hues I've mixed up out of those three colours. Now I'm happy with all our base colours. Now I'm going to add a gloss coat, and for this we're going to use XF22 by Tamiya, and again I'm going to thin this down with a little bit of lacquer thinner. About 50-50 is a good ratio here, I find. And this is just going to protect all our preceding paint layers and also going to prepare for the decals and subsequent weathering. I'm more in the camp of putting gloss down for decals or decals. You don't have to, but I've been burnt too many times in the past by decals silvering, so I just prefer just as a fail-safe and as a backup, just to ensure that I just gloss coat everything. So now moving on to the decals, and for this we're going to be using just the kit supply decals. So Tamiya decals are quite thick, so you do have to use a decal solution or a decal solution, and for this we're just going to be using microsol. I tend to use microsol for both setting and for making the decal conform to the model. So I'm going for a 10th Armour Division vehicle here. These were present at Bastogne, a nice Ardennes themed truck here. So once I'm happy with the decals and everything is sat down, I'm going to seal everything again, just protect the decals with a little bit more gloss, and once that's allowed to dry, we're going to get on to the weathering. And how I like to start off my weathering process is just by adding some chipping. And for this we're going back to our Vallejo US Air Force olive drab and yellow ochre mix, as well as a little bit of, in this case, AK Gen 3 white. And I'm going to make up a mixture of these three colours to make a very light version of our base colour. I'm just going to take a little bit of sponge here, and I'm just going to make some jagged edges, and this is going to be the applicator that we're going to use for applying some chips through the sponge method. So taking our light olive drab mix, I'm just going to start working with the sponge, just removing some of the excess paint. I don't want too much paint on the sponge. And I'm just going to start working the sponge around the sharp edges of, in this case, the cab. So any detail I feel that it's going to come into friction, or it's going to get wear and tear just because it's a sharp edge and it's going to get worn down quickly, I'm going to start adding larger chips using the sponge. And then for finer chips, I'm going to use a 00 fine bristle brush here with a good point on it. And I'm going to start just manually painting in some more finer chips. So this can be quite an involved step, but I would recommend just take your time and maybe over a couple of evenings just slowly build up these chips. So now to add deeper chips to kind of represent the paint chip back to the actual steel of the actual vehicle body, we're going to take some Vallejo German Camo Black Brown. This is one of my favourite colours. I use it in so many different jobs. And just tinning this down with a little bit of water and coming back with our fine tipped 00 brush here, I'm going to start painting into these areas that we've already framed with a sponge. Again, just firstly adding surface chips using our lightened version of our olive drab mix here. And then on the metal areas, I'm going to come back in with Camo Black Brown and create some bare metal. So some of the components on the cargo bed are actually made out of wood, and just to create the notion of bare wood coming through the paint, I'm just going to take some Vallejo deck tan, and again with our fine brush here, I'm just going to carefully pick out some of these leading edges where the paint might have worn down to the actual wood underneath. So once I'm happy with the chipping, we're going to start moving on to our oils. And this is like my favorite part of all my builds. I love working with oils, it's so much fun. And we're going to start off with a dot filter. So I'm just going to take some colours here from 502 Octaeon and their modelling oil series here. I'm just going to take a couple of colours that I think are going to work. So you can really use any colour you want for this. I always find olive green, ochre and white work really well for olive drab vehicles. But I also have a few earth tones and a few blue tones that I can mix in and add dots of those just to add a little bit of visual interest. So first what I like to do is I'm just going to prepare the surface by just applying a tiny amount of Artist White Spirit to the surface of the model. And now I'm just going to come in with an old brush and start adding my dots. So I'm going to put quite a bit of white down because I want to kind of add a little bit of bleaching to the model, just add a bit of basic wear and tear. And then I'm going to come in with some of the darker tones and some of the earth tones just to add a little bit more wear and tear and weathering. So now I'm just going to take a fresh brush here and I'm going to start pulling these dots in a single direction. Now this looks very jarring and very garish, so you know, if you're a new modeler, this step can kind of freak you out a little bit at first because you're like, oh, I just ruined my model type of thing. However, we're going to blend this back and all this is going to blend back together and be so subtle. So I'm just going to take a brush here that's a soft bristled brush that's nice and clean. There's no spirit or no oil on this at all. And I'm just going to start pulling these streaks in a single direction, either up or down. And I'm going to blend and feather these back till they're nice and faint. So some modelers maintain that you can only put dot filters on vertical surfaces. In reality, you can put them on any type of surface, vertical or horizontal, it does not matter. The effect is still the same. So here on the bonnet or the hood, I'm doing the exact same here, just putting dots going lengthwise down the bonnet, and that's just going to create a nice little bit of weathering and kind of rain streaks and what have you. It's also a handy way too of blending in the decals and make them look painted on and that they've actually aged with the vehicle. So now I'm going to start adding some weathering to our tyres, and for this I'm going to take some Vallejo Panzerrace's Highlight Flesh and some Vallejo Model Colour German Grey. I'm going to mix these up kind of 50-50 to create like a kind of an off kind of sandy grey colour. And I'm going to take a technique that I saw once in an Adam Wilder build from years ago on a model magazine, and I'm just going to take a sponge and start chipping, if you like, this lighter colour along the leading edge of the wheel. I want to keep the centre of the wheel in the original German grey or NATO black colour. And you can do this in multiple layers, getting lighter and lighter as you so wish, depending on how far you want to push it. I'm going for like a winter tyre, so these are going to be covered in mud later on, so I'm not going to go too crazy adding subsequent layers of weathering to the rubber of these tyres because you're not going to see it. So with the dot filters done, we're going to start adding some detail painting. And I'm just going to take some AK Gen 3 ochre khaki, and I'm just going to start painting this into some of the canvas straps for some of the tools and the seat belt, if you like, that goes across the cab, you know, just to keep everybody in the vehicle, if you like. However, if I do mess up and get a bit of overspill, I can just take a clean brush that's been dipped in water and I can just erase any overspills while the paint is still wet. So now I'm going to start adding the base color for the canvas top and the seats, and for this I'm going to take some Vallejo model color Russian uniform and khaki. I'm going to mix these up roughly 50-50, and this is going to be my base color for the canvas top for the cab as well as the seats. So I tend not to use a lot of rust in my models. However, I'm going to do a little bit of rust effect on the exhaust. And for this, I'm just going to take some MIG Productions light rust effect and just put a small amount on an old kind of haggard brush. And I'm just going to stipple this onto the exhaust. So now we're going to move on to the step I love the most, which is the panel lines or dot filters. And for this I'm going to take some 502 Shadow Brown. I'm also going to take a little bit of 502 Light Rust that we're going to come back to the exhaust with later on. And I'm going to heavily tint these down with some artist grade white spirit. So we're going to make up our own little washes. So I'm going to make sure I give these a good mix, make sure the pigment and the thinner are well mixed together. And then we're going to come in and start adding our panel washes just to help frame some of the details in the next step. So I'm going to start focusing this wash into any engraved detail, so any panel lines, any rivet heads, anything that's got like a pronounced detail or anything that might cast a shadow. So I'm just going to start working my way around the model and just working this wash in to various different details I want to frame. and just taking a nice clean and soft bristle brush. Once the wash has been allowed to stand for 3 or 4 minutes, I'm just going to start blending it with this soft bristle brush here, and this is just going to feather some of the edges here and take away any of the pooling as well. So it just creates a nice subtle effect and just blends everything together. I'm not being too aggressive with this, I'm just applying light pressure with the brush and then just letting the bristles do the work for me. Now we're coming back to our light rust mix with our 502 oils, and we're just going to basically exactly what we did with the MIG rust. We're just going to take this slightly lighter, more rich rust color, and I'm just going to stipple this on top of the preceding rust layer. I'm also going to make up a quick little wash of 502 earth, just using the exact same method, just using a little bit of Artist White Spirit, and I'm going to apply this wash into the radiator grill just to give a little bit of weathering, even though you're not going to really see any of this. However, it's just good just in case any of it is visible. So before we start putting our pin washes onto the cargo bed, we're just going to pick out the reflectors and taillights with a little bit of AK Gen 3 RAL 8013, which is their red brown or rot brown. And I find this just like when this dries, it's a really deep kind of like red brown. It's perfect for like the reflectors. So I'm going to apply our shadow brown wash to the actual cargo bed itself in a very kind of messy, kind of sludge wash way. This might be a technique you're more kind of familiar with aircraft modelers, that they'll apply a very heavy coat over the entire aircraft. I tend not to do that on my tanks that much, but for a nice big flat surface like this, it's a perfect way of quickly getting a sense of grime and shadow. And while the wash is still wet, I'm just going to take some paper towel and I'm just going to scrub away the excess. I'm just going to catch and pull in a single direction, and I'm just going to leave a residue of shadow brown in some of the recessed areas. And any area that I want to scrub away the shadow brown entirely, I'm just going to take a brush that's been dipped in white spirit and just wash away some of the areas I don't want. So we're coming back to our shadow brown, and we're going to start picking out the different slats and bolt heads. Also, the jerry cans and fuel drums are going to get the exact same treatment. I'm just going to start picking out any of the details here just with this wash. And this is going to be the first layer of weathering for these as well. We're going to come back in the next episode and add a lot more fuel stains and grime and dust to these. But right now we're just going to give the engraved details a quick wash just to help pop these out a little bit. So with the pin washing done, we're just going to add a quick wash to the canvas top for the cab as well as the seats. And for this we're going to use some Citadel's Agrit's Earthshade. So I'm going to apply this somewhat heavily. I'm going to be quite careful though when applying this. This is not like an oil wash. Acrylic washes tend to behave more like a stain. So once they're applied and you're never going to be able to undo them. So we have to be a little bit careful to keep this where we want it, and also to make sure it doesn't pool and run down the model. The reason why I kind of like using an acrylic wash for like canvas or for material like this, it's just it gives a slight texture which I kind of like. And once that wash is allowed to dry, I'm going to come back in with our original canvas mixture here, which is our khaki and Russian uniform mix. And I'm just going to start reapplying this, leaving the wash in the recess. And I'm actually going to do this in a slight stippling motion, just to impart a slight texture. And that's just going to help sell the fact that this is a canvas rather than any other type of synthetic material. So then I'm going to work on some of the tools. So the tools have been base coated in Iraqi sand for the wooden aspects, and then the actual steel or metal parts have been base coated in German camo black brown. And how I like to create like a wood grain texture is I'm just going to take some Artist's burnt umber straight out of the tube. I haven't thinned this down, and I'm just going to paint it onto the wooden halves of the shovel and axe. And then just taking a brush that's been moistened in white spirit, I'm just going to start pulling this wash in a single direction. And this is going to impart a very simple but yet really nice wood grain effect. Also, I've given the metal parts a very washed down glaze of model colour neutral grey, just to create a slightly metal sheen to them. And there you have a very simple but really effective way of doing your tools and wooden handles. I decided I'll come in, just add a little bit of rust here to the shovel using the MiG Productions light rust effect. Just a small amount, I'm not going to go too crazy with this. And then just with a soft brush, I'm just going to blend this. This is a clean brush, and I'm just going to blend this out. I don't want it too stark. So everything allowed to dry, and I'm going to add a matte layer. And for this, we're going to take some Mr. Colour H40. This is from their aqueous line, and this is their matte varnish. I thinned this down with a little bit of Mr. Colour self-leveling thinner. And this is going to serve as the base layer for all the enamel weathering that we're going to do in the next episode, as well as knock back some of that shine. The reason for doing it now is we're going to be adding a lot of snow and ice effects later on. So I want everything to be a matte coat now, because if I hit it later on, I'll lose any of that kind of winter sheen or mud effect. And everything was going so well until it dried and it frosted. Well shit. Now I want to show you what you can do to try to save this. So the trick here now is not to panic. What happened is I think the solution had kind of turned into a gloop, so it might have turned and caused the frosting. So now I'm just going to take some Mr. Colour top coat. This is our matte top coat. This is a rattle can. And I'm going to give it a couple of coats. And as you can see here, I managed to recover the effect. There's a little bit of frosting here and there that another coat or two should fix. So guys, thankfully we didn't sabotage our build and we can keep going. So join the next episode, we're going to be taking a look at adding mud and snow effects, as well as adding the figure to this GMC truck here. So guys, I really hope you enjoyed this video. This is one of my longer ones, so I hope it wasn't too boring. And do catch me in the next episode where we'll be taking a look at doing the final weathering for this vehicle. I've been Shane, thank you so much, stay safe out there, and bye bye.